repetition is the master teacher. So I'm just going to say these words. We had creation, right? That was the very beginning. Then we had corruptions. I used to teach this and say corruption, but we realized that the corruption that entered into the world is a little bit more, it's a little bit more complicated than that. And we watched the corruptions that led us up to the problem that we see in the world today, right? So we had Tower of Babel was the last of those. And we need to keep those things in our minds, because what the Bible does is it assumes that we have those things as we move forward. We have those things in our minds. And so today, we're going to look at Yahweh. This is going to be one of I call them the meta concepts, the big concepts that are weaving through this talk or through this section of Scripture. One of the meta concepts is that God is doing cosmic warfare against the gods of another nation. And so you're like, okay, who are the gods and what is that? Well, we realize we reflect back on the Tower of Babel, that you had the rebellion in the heavens and the earth that led to the situation where God has sent out the nations and disinherited them and given them to their divine rulers. And now Yahweh is going to battle against some of these divine rulers. And the reason he's doing this is he is showing the world, I'm the big guy. I'm the one that's in charge. And I have my people that I've chosen, and I'm coming to rescue them. And you other gods, just get out of my way. And the rest of the earth is supposed to see this and reflect back on this moment and be like, whoa, this is the big guy. So if we have the Tower of Babel in our minds, then we really get more out of what's going on here in Exodus. Does that make sense? Is that clearish? So God's divine plan to fix the issue that culminated at the Tower of Babel was to choose Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And we saw Abraham become a family, right? But now we saw how this family moved into Egypt because God was going to save them from the plague. And now they're in Egypt. And this is where Exodus picks up. So it's one continuous story. So the opening, I'll read this, and then I want to go into some of the kind of the meta concepts that I discussed. The opening of Exodus, just to kind of bring us here, Joseph died. This is Exodus 1, 6 through 8. Joseph died. Who was Joseph? Y'all remember Joseph? Right? We got to talk. Who was Joseph?
Is it Isaac's son?
Yeah. No, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. So Joseph is one of the sons of Jacob, right?
I was thinking Israel.
Yeah. And so he was the one that helped them get into Egypt. He's the one that God sent before them, the coat of many colors guy, to save the world from this plague. And he's the one that brought them into Egypt. He's got them settled in this land. And so that's where we left off, remember? So right here, Exodus is keying in. Hey, now we're forward in time a little bit. So Joseph died, and all of his brothers, and all that generation. So that whole group that we were just, when you're reading through a novel, and you're like, maybe, or watching a movie, and you're like, man, I fall in love with these characters, and then they die. And it's like, man, it's a heartbreak. We were just hanging out with all these people in the Bible, and now we've moved on past them. And it's like, oh man. But here we are. So Joseph and all that generation died. But the sons of Israel, the sons of Jacob, were fruitful and increased greatly and multiplied and became exceedingly mighty, so that the land was filled with them. So just imagine you're the president of no, this is bad timing. Just imagine you're the king of a nation. And suddenly there's this people group imagine this 1,000 years ago, and not right now. Way too political. 1,000 years ago, you're the king of a nation, and suddenly there's this people group that is just exploded, and you're like, I don't really know, what if they take over things? Well, this is what Pharaoh is feeling. He's seeing these Hebrews multiply, and then the text says, I forgot to put it in here, no, it's actually in here. So Exodus 1, verse 8, it says, a new king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph. Who did not know Joseph. So in other words, Joseph had made Egypt the richest nation in the world. He saved the world. And so like the Hebrews are living high and mighty in Goshen in the land of Egypt because like their forefather saved everybody. But then this guy comes along that doesn't remember Joseph. And there's where the problem sets in. He's got all these people in his land. He's like, we got to take care of this. Right? So what does he do? What is Pharaoh's decision in the matter? What's his bright idea? Simple question.
To kill all the sons? Like, revolt
So even before that, what's he going to do with these people?
Now I put them to work.
Yeah, he made them slaves. The slaves of Egypt. Good job. And so that's the predicament that we find ourselves in. And God's going to save them. We're going to look at that. But I want to pull out just some of the big concepts. The deliverance and the exodus from Egypt, like, it's a big deal in the Bible. God's pretty proud of it, actually. There's a few things that God's proud of. One is creation. Like, he's always bragging on creation. The next one that God is always bragging on is the exodus. Like, he's always looking back at that thing and like, y'all remember, I saved you from Egypt, and I made a great name for myself in the earth. And truly, like, he did. And then another one later on, obviously, is Jesus. He's very proud of that work. But this is a major one. So, but what's really interesting, this is, I wish we had time to really talk on this, but the deliverance from Egypt that God does, it actually is a prefigurement or a type of what's going to happen at the end. So just as Moses came and delivered the people of Israel out of bondage, so the Messiah Jesus will come and deliver his people again from a future bondage. So the imagery all throughout is like constantly being picked up later on. So I pulled a for instance. If you guys want to look here in your notes, Jeremiah 23, 5 through 8. It's really interesting. It says, behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will raise up for David a righteous branch. So one of David's descendants is going to be called a righteous branch. And God said, I'm going to raise him up one day. You're like, well, who could that be? And he will reign as king and act wisely and do justice and righteousness in the land. In his days, Judah will be saved and Israel will be secure. And this is his name by which he will be called, the Lord our righteousness. So one day, David is going to have a seed who's going to rule over everything. And he's going to be called the Lord our righteousness. And we've talked about all of those concepts. But then, verse 7, it says this, therefore, behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when they will no longer say, as the Lord lives, who brought the sons of Israel out from the land of Egypt. In other words, you're not going to look back and say, whoa, look at what God did in the past of Egypt. Like, he delivered us from Egypt. That was crazy. You're not going to say that anymore one day. One day you're going to say, as the Lord lives, who brought us up and led back the descendants of the household of Israel from the northern lands and from all the countries where I've driven them, they will live in their own soil. One day you're going to look back and actually reflect on another deliverance. And this other deliverance is going to happen when the future son of David comes. So when Jesus comes back to deliver the people from the great tribulation, it's going to be so grand that they're going to stop talking about Egypt. They're going to start talking about the deliverance of the Messiah when he comes, Jesus, and sets up his kingdom. So the whole Exodus account is like a prefigurement, the best one that we have for Jesus' future deliverance. This is a big concept here. Another one of the meta concepts. The next one I already mentioned, but God is doing cosmic level spiritual warfare. And what's interesting is each of the plagues, we're going to try and look at those, they correspond to an Egyptian god. So these things should be remembered back from the Tower of Babel. Already mentioned that. Another one, God has chosen his nation Israel, but this nation is being oppressed by another god and their people. And Yahweh is going to take back his people. We already covered that. God very proud of the Exodus. I already put that. This last one, this is interesting because Egypt is like pictured like a womb that Israel is being formed in. So picture this, it's like they're in this place where God is preparing them and forming this nation. But then the plagues that we'll see, they're like birth pains. The plagues are like birth pains. And then the deliverance is like the birthing of the nation. And this is picked up later on in the New Testament. Jesus compares the future trouble to birth pains and stuff, and he's just pointing them back, like, just like you were born out of Egypt, you're going to be born again in the future. So it's really interesting. This is like the birthing of a nation now that we're seeing. So that's all the kind of the big concepts that I really wanted us to know about this Exodus. These are the big things to take away and to move forward with. Any questions on that before we move on, though? Pretty straightforward. Cool. All right, well, let's just jump into chapter 1. And I want someone to summarize the chapter for me. The events before Moses. We're in the land. We've already talked about they're multiplying, but what are the events leading up to Moses?
What was said earlier, a bunch of Israelites were popping out of nowhere, it seems like. So they start ordering like midwives to kill those like babies and stuff, but like something.
Yeah. So, yeah, kill the midwives. Are supposed to kill the Hebrew sons when they come out. Did they listen? I missed that part.
I don't think so.
No, they did not obey.
Said they had the fear of God.
They had the fear of God. Wasn't that cool? That the midwives feared the Lord, and so they didn't listen to Pharaoh. And actually, the Lord blessed the midwives for obeying and fearing the Lord. Cool. And so, what's supposed to happen? Actually, it might have been chapter 2 that it starts, but. So let's pick up chapter 2. I mean, chapter 1's pretty straightforward. It's funny how much time is being summarized. It's like the entire life of Moses is summarized in the next few verses. And then, so tell me, somebody summarize chapter 2, the life of Moses in Egypt before he leaves Egypt. Somebody just summarize that time of Moses' life for me. Come on, guys, we read it. Call on somebody.
He was found by Pharaoh's daughter.
Okay.
And then he was raised up by the Pharaoh family.
Mm-hmm.
And then he like killed him. And then he married him.
Yeah, good. Really good summary. Yeah. I would use more words. That was really good. Yeah. What's interesting, though, is, so the babies are supposed to be, when they're born, thrown into the Nile River, right? Well, so Moses was put into the Nile River, but he was put in what the Bible calls, the Hebrew is the same word for an ark. So he was put into an ark. What does that remind you of? Noah. And saved through the waters to be found by Pharaoh's daughter. Now, I just wanted to picture this through Moses' mother's point of view. She has this child. She can't keep him. So she puts him in an ark in the waters. And then she watches, or her sister watches, Moses is saved. And then Pharaoh's daughter is like, hey, go give this to one of the Hebrew women to raise for me. So Moses ends up back with his mother to raise by his mother while he's growing up. I mean, I just that's really cool. Like, if you're the mother of this child and you watch God's provision all the way through. So his mother actually raises him, and then he's brought back to being the Prince of Egypt, right? So, cool. So this chapter summarizes, you talked about up to, he kills somebody because they're persecuting one of his family. So he kills an Egyptian, and that gets found out, and so he runs. He runs, and that's where verse 11 picks up. Moses is older. He's trying to defend some of the Hebrew slaves, kills them. Somebody read for me in the notes, Exodus 2:15 right there.
Moses fled from the presence of Pharaoh and settled in the land of Midian, and he sat down by a well. And there the daughters of Reuel came to water their flocks. Moses helps them, and that's not the first.
That's okay, you can read.
Moses helps them and ends up coming back to live in their land. Takes a wife from among the daughters of Reuel and has a son.
Mm-hmm. So, how many times have we found one of these guys beside a well? Like, they're just always beside the well, about to get married, like every
The
time.
well is like an old Tinder.
Where are you going? By the well? Oh, I gotcha. So, yeah, so he helps them water their flocks, ends up back with their family in the land of Midian, and ends up with a wife. Did you guys know Moses had a son?
No.
Yeah. Isn't that crazy? Yeah. Yeah. From chapter 2, I'll just finish this. Somebody read that those last verses, Exodus 2, 23 and 20 through 25. Kind of sets us up for the story right here.
Now it came about in the course of those many days that the king of Egypt died, and that the sons of Israel sighed because of the bondage, and they cried out. And their cry for help because of their bondage rose up to God. So God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. God saw the sons of Israel, and God took notice of them.
Okay, so y'all see my question here. What does it mean? What do you think it meant that God remembered his covenant? What would that mean?
And it made the Israelites into a great nation, but they're like, I'm just like you. So
Yeah.
he remembered his covenant, like I got you now.
Yeah, so had he forgotten anything? No, I mean,
Forgotten.
yeah,
It's like
Yeah, because it was just like, already never trained me together.
yeah. It's time to move on. So he remembers his covenant that he has with Abraham. It's like, to remember is like a covenantal term of loyalty. Like, I remember what I promised. And so he's going to be faithful. Like, we look at these things and we're supposed to see like, oh, this God is faithful. So he remembers his covenant. They've been fruitful and multiplied. They're doing that well. And so he's made a great nation, but now he's got to deliver them. So he remembers his covenant. Any questions from chapter 1 or 2 before we jump into chapter 3? Any notes or observations you guys made?
Such a crazy chapter. I like it, the way it starts. I always think of the Prince of Egypt movie.
That's
So,
what I was
like,
thinking.
when he like kills the dude and he hides him and he thinks he's safe. And then they're just like, oh, you're going to kill us like him? He's probably like, bro, how did you find out?
Yeah.
I'm kind of curious how they found out. What would be cool to know? You buried him. Like rain and then like stuff walk away or something maybe.
Yeah, I don't know. Isn't it crazy though? They made like half the movie on just a few verses.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's what I was thinking. I was like, oh, I wonder what happens so quickly.
Yeah. Yeah. So rule, if ever you're watching a movie and it's about the Bible, don't let that be like your biblical text. You got to go back and look at it because they probably exaggerated to make a movie.
It's like, to be honest, I don't remember that one either.
Mm-hmm. Yep, sure does. Sure does. Cool. All right, so let's jump into chapter 3. So Moses has been out in the wilderness for some time, and he's just become a shepherd. He's just settled down. I'm sure he probably doesn't think his life is going anywhere other than just, where everybody else's life is going. But he's out in the wilderness, and suddenly he sees a sight. What does he see? A burning bush, a tree on fire. But what's happening with this bush? Why is it so strange?
It wasn't burning up, it was just on fire.
It was just on fire. It was just on fire. I'll read through this section. I'm going to read through these verses and just kind of look at the emboldened part that I have in front of you guys on the notes, and just see if you notice something. Now Moses was pasturing the flock of Jethro. Notice his father-in-law's name changed. It was like Reuel or something, and now it's Jethro. I didn't read up on why that is, but just notice that it's there. Moses was pasturing the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the west side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. Now later, Horeb is Mount Sinai, and we'll pick that up later. But notice this, verse 2. The angel of the Lord appeared to him in a blazing fire from the midst of a bush. And he looked, and behold, the bush was burning with fire, yet the bush was not consumed. So Moses said, I must go aside and see this marvelous sight, why the bush is not burning. I just don't want us to get lost in like the realness of this. Like we can just read that and it's like, oh, the bush is on fire. But just imagine that, like you're seeing and there's a bush and it's not burning. Like just divine or inspired imagination is good in these things. So he goes aside. When the Lord, so first it was the angel of the Lord, but now it's when the Lord saw that he turned aside to look, God called to him from the midst of the bush and said, Moses, Moses. And he said, here I am. Then he said, do not come near. Remove your sandals from your feet, for the place you are standing is holy ground. He said also, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. Then Moses hid his face and was afraid. He's afraid to look at God. Just like see what happened here. Did you pick up on anything that seemed strange?
It was like kept changing. Angel of the Lord, and the Lord, and God.
So which one was it?
All of it was God, just using different acronyms or names, or was it multiple?
So who's the angel of the Lord?
Jesus? God?
Well, we introduced him in an earlier chapter. It was a little while back. Dave, I think, was Jacob wrestling with the angel of the Lord? He wrestled with a man. But the angel of the Lord had come out and like met people before. And a lot of times it's like this embodied figure is coming to like meet with people. And it's the Lord, but then it's somebody else. And it's like, what's going on here? I just wanted to point that out. Like the angel of the Lord is then called the Lord and then called the God of your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And the ground that you're on is holy ground. Like regular angels don't make ground holy. Only one does. So this is like a concept that's clearly there for us to pick up on. And it sets us up and gets us ready for a God-man who is also like man and God and one, however that works. But yeah. Questions on that? Other than me explaining the Trinity? I'm not going to try that. All right, so what does God tell Moses though? Somebody tell me the kind of the big picture of what he tells Moses out of the bush.
He used I am who I am sent you when they ask stuff like that. Yeah.
When who asks what?
If people ask, like
About-
who sent you
Sent you to do what?
to deliver?
Okay, there you go. So I want to deliver my people. Yeah, so that's where he starts. And God explains that he's heard the cry of Israel, because they've been in bondage now for 400 years. But what does Moses ask? He asks what you just said. There's a lot of gods out there, burning bush guy. I need to know, like, which one you are, because they might ask. Sorry, that might have been a little sacrilegious. But Moses wants to know.
Oh, can't we? Don't we?
Moses wants to know what the name of this God is. And why? Because Moses lived in Egypt for a while. And there's a lot of gods. Like, you don't just grow up and say, hey, God told me. You're like, which one? Like, who? Is it the sun god or who? So he wants to know, like, what's your name? The name of our ancestral God. What is it? And this is interesting. I pulled it from this text from the Holman Christian Standard. But God replies to Moses, I am who I am. Now this word is echya. I can't say it very well, but echya is how he responds. And it's like to say to be, or like he, how does it go? I just looked at it. Anyway, it's basically God saying, I am who I am, or I will be who I will be, is what God's saying. So basically he's saying, I am like the ultimate source. Like nobody else sources me. I source everything else. I am who I am. I will be who I will be. But then keep reading. This is what you are to say to the Israelites. So he just said, this is my name. This is what you're to say to them. I am has sent you. Now that word I am is actually different from the I am who I am. That's echya. Try and say it right. But you have to like, when you say it in Hebrew. But now he's saying, go tell him Yahweh is sending you. So instead of saying, he is who, or I will be who I will be sent you, go and tell them, he is sending me. I think is how it works. So it's like giving him a name that he can say, this God, who just says, I am, is sending you, is sending me. So this is where we get the name Yahweh. It's the Hebrew letters that we would transcribe YHVH or YHWH, and it's just Yahweh, or Yod He, Mod He, or the letters in the Hebrew. But yeah, anyway, this is kind of a nerdy moment for me, but I think this is really cool that like, he's like, Yah is me, and you go tell him Yahweh is sending you to deliver you. So, and then he says, where is it? God said to Moses, say this to the Israelites, Yahweh, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my name forever. This is how I am to be remembered in every generation. Now later on, I don't know if I put the verse in here, he actually explains that I didn't reveal to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob my actual name. I was just Adonai? No, he was something else to them. But now he's saying, this is my actual name. And this is where we get Yahweh. This is also where we get the I am statements that Jesus pulls to. So, all right, chapter 4. This one, I just wanted to mention a couple things. Anything you guys noticed in chapter 4, though, before I start out?
It seemed like God got kind of irritated with Moses. Because Moses kept like, no, I don't think you should send me. He's like, nah. I was like, look. And it said like God, and she was like, okay, look, dude, you're doing it.
Yeah.
So stop.
So Moses makes all kinds of excuses. He's like, I kind of stutter. And God's like, don't worry, I made mouths. I'll fix it. He's like, well, I'm just like this or that. He's like, I'm really big, Moses. I'll take care of you. But finally, I think he even shows him like some miracles. Yeah. So God keeps responding with a miracle to reassure Moses. He's like, here's a miracle. And Moses is like, but still, I'm just like, I'm not that great. And finally, it's interesting. Finally, by the fourth time, I think it is, we see the first record. This is interesting. The first recorded time that the Bible says that God became angry. Like it's the first time that the text says, I didn't put the verse in here. Anyway, but it's the first, like we see instances like the flood, and it actually doesn't say that he got angry at the flood. It says that his heart was grieved that he had made me. But now we see God got actually angry. His anger was kindled toward Moses. And what did he do? Did he strike Moses? Moses was like, I can't talk very well. And he got angry. He said, fine, I'm sending Aaron with you. He's like, I'll just provide it. Gosh. So that's how God's anger, displays itself in this situation. It's with, merciful provision. It's like, I'm going to take care of you. Shut up. I don't know. Maybe that's not how it went. But this is just an interesting place to actually see how God responds when he actually grows angry. Now, later we know God is slow to anger. But even after this, we don't see him striking somebody dead. He says, fine, I'm going to give you something to take care of you. Just listen. And sure enough, he does. So, but finally Moses relents and begins towards Egypt to obey God. He is to tell Pharaoh that Israel is the Lord's firstborn. Interesting phrase. Israel is the Lord's firstborn. Which doesn't have to do with who came out first. This phrase right here. This phrase is about the importance that this nation holds in the family of the nations. This is in God's eyes, this is the top nation. They're the firstborn. They have the important roles that the firstborn would have in the family. So they're not more special or more blessed necessarily, but their role in the earth is like a firstborn would serve over the family. It's called primogeniture, but that's a big word for just saying the role of the firstborn. So God's like, this is my firstborn. I'm coming after them. So, Even here, God informs Moses of the final plague, the killing of Egypt's firstborn. So God is saying, they're my firstborn, and to get them, I'll kill the sons of Egypt's firstborn. Notice the contrast. Pretty severe. Somebody summarize chapter 5. It's kind of in the notes, but do y'all remember exactly what happened in that chapter?
Like, there was the Pharaoh, and he told him that, and the Pharaoh basically more harder,
Yeah.
a lot more harder. He makes it so, like, he takes away the given them straw to the Israelites. They say, find your own, but you still have to make the same amount.
Yeah.
It's just harder now. And then he starts, like, beating them more,
Mm-hmm.
because they're not meeting the quota, because they don't have the materials to do so.
Yeah.
So it just goes, let me make life harder.
Yeah. So right here we get to see what is the character of this Pharaoh. It's just not very good. So we're seeing who this guy really is. So Moses makes a request. Pharaoh responds by increasing their hardship. So chapter 6, God uses strong covenant language when speaking about the deliverance of his people. So this kind of shows us really the severity of God's heart towards this situation. He is in covenant with these people. Like, remember, he walked through the blood in the midst of the animals. He covenanted himself to this people. And he's here like, I'm gonna take care of it. So strong covenant language, God spoke further to Moses and said to them, I am the Lord, and I appeared to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as God Almighty. But my name, there it is, my name, Lord, I did not make known to them. I also established my covenant with them to give them the land of Canaan, the land in which they sojourn. So, yeah, this is like, I didn't put all of the verses there that I could have, but God is like relentless about his covenant and how severe it is. Like, we have to grasp how much God has bound his life up with that people. I mean, it's amazing to me, but yeah. Everybody good? Be distracted? Okay. Chapter 7, any comments by you guys on that one?
Is Yahweh, is it spelled Y-A-H-W-E-H, or is it Y-H-W-H? Where's it go?
So in the Hebrew, there wasn't originally any vowels. So the Hebrew letters, if we were to kind of turn them into English, it would be like YHWH or YHVH. But there's like a whole history of how you got vowels in there and stuff. But probably the best pronunciation would be Yahweh. But yeah. So original Hebrew is no vowels. So yeah. Cool. All right. So chapter 7 opens up. Moses was 80 years old. He went to Pharaoh, and Aaron's staff. Let's talk about that. It wasn't Moses' staff. It was Aaron's staff. So Aaron and him finally join up, and they go to Pharaoh. Where do you think the magicians got their power from? They have other gods that they're worshiping, and there's power going on there. So, like right here, we're getting the first glimpses of cosmic warfare. Like God's showing, I've got a sign. They're like, fine, I'll do it too. But then God's sign eats the other signs. I mean, it's just like, okay, fine, whatever. That's first. We get the first instance.
I know you said don't use like the movie, but I know in the movie, they just kind of like,
No, I'm just laughing because
they
it's,
make like visual effects to show,
Yeah.
like the Pharaoh, like, oh, we can do that too, when they actually can't. But like, when you actually look at the movie, they could.
Oh, did they just have visual effects in the
Well,
movie?
yeah, when we get kind of jumping ahead with like the blood and the water, like I remember in the movie they had like red powder and they filled with water, like, oh, look, we did it too.
Oh, okay.
But it's not actually blood.
Yeah.
But, like coming here, like, they can.
I think they're actually doing these things. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, Satan has power too, that's the
Totally.
thing.
Yeah.
And so, I think people
Just
forget
don't teach
that.
that to children, I guess.
Yeah. I think it's an attempt to like make everything but God, because we don't, we're commonly like, there's no other gods. And it's like, well, actually, there are other divine beings out there, and so like it's an attempt to kind of make it so those aren't really real, but they are really real. Like things are happening. Yeah. So, Yeah, so, I forgot to mention Moses is 80 at this point when he goes in. But, so the next thing we see, Pharaoh's heart grows hardened, but Moses goes out and turns the Nile to blood. Now, both of these things are replicated by the magicians. I wanted to do this, though. The gods that are being represented, we might not have time for this, but the first one, the god of the Nile, is the Egyptian plague, the water turning to blood. This was like to confront the god of the Nile. So, like, there's a god over the Nile River for the Egyptians. They've got one that they've made up or is actually there, who knows. But Yahweh comes in and is like, I'll just murder him and turn him to blood. And so he turns the god of the Nile to blood, or however that works. But, like, that's the imagery that's going on. It's like, you killed our god, sort of. So, and the fish die out, and the magicians just make it worse. And then they dig around the Nile for water for, I think it was 7 days. But yeah, so this is what's going on. God's just like making war with the Egyptian gods. So chapter 8, we got the next plague is the plague of frogs. That is also replicated. It is going after the Egyptian god, what is it? It's the frogs. Heket is the Egyptian goddess of fertility, water, and renewal. But she is pictured with a frog's head. So God's going after that god. Yahweh's going after that god. It's replicated. But what we see starting here is a cycle where a plague comes. Pharaoh sort of repents. God, in his mercy, relents the plague. And then Pharaoh hardens his heart. And we're back at the beginning again. So this cycle, you'll notice, did you guys pick up on that? You're going through? Pharaoh hardens his heart. Pharaoh hardens his heart. Now the Lord had said, I'm going to harden Pharaoh's heart. But the text up to this point has said that Pharaoh is hardening his heart. And whether you're a Calvinist or an Arminianist will determine if you think that God's doing it yet or if it's not yet. But, you know, it could be that God's doing this, hardening the heart. Or it could just be Pharaoh at this point. Because we know, like, he's not the greatest guy. But the next one is when we get a change, is the plague of flies. That one's not replicated. That's the next plague. It's in chapter 8. It's not replicated. The magicians said to Pharaoh, this is the finger of God. But Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and he did not listen to them, as the Lord had said. But this one was not replicated, and it also, if you guys noticed in the text, this is now when God starts separating. Now the Israelites are not going to be experiencing these plagues, but the Egyptians will be. And so God is making a distinction. He is making this clear. This is my people.
You always see the kids' story Bibles of like the frogs just jumping around. Oh, there's some frogs, or the blood or something.
Yeah.
Like when you really think about it, like that's crazy. That's a lot of frogs.
Yeah,
That's
it is.
tough. That's a lot of blood.
Yeah, because what was it? Like the frogs, especially, they were like in the beds and the cooking pots.
Can't sleep.
I mean, can you imagine that?
And then they died.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they just, at the end of the plague, they all died. So there's a bunch of rotten frogs and then flies. I mean, like, everything, it wasn't just like inconvenient, it was gross and unsanitary.
Exactly. Like this is.
Yeah, it's just against all USDA.
But also, frogs are really loud.
Oh, true.
So
Yeah.
if you had them all in your bed while you were asleep, like.
Take that.
So what you'll notice too, each of these are kind of like they're escalating. So the first ones are, I mean, like you said, it's bad, but to some degree, it's just kind of like a major annoyance. Because then you have flies, and it's like, this is bad. But it's still not like, we're all going to die. It's just one of those, like, this is just really bad. But then it starts to vamp up a little bit, and the severity grows. So chapter 9, we have 3 plagues. We have the death of the Egyptian livestock. Now, what's interesting is you read that plague, and if you're just kind of like watching how the text is weaving and flowing, Pharaoh doesn't respond at all to this plague because of the hardness of his heart. So you can imagine like these plagues are happening, and then this one happens. He's just like, I'm not responding at all to you, and he just goes off mad. Then the next plague, the plague of boils. This one, now we're starting to like really mess with like the physical bodies of the Egyptians. Like it's getting really bad. And under this plague, we see the first time in the text, Exodus 9:12. First time it says, the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he did not listen to them, just as the Lord had spoken to Moses. So every other time it says Pharaoh's heart grew strong or grew hard. And then there was one that he just didn't even respond to. He just walks off. And then the very next one, God hardens his heart. So you have to like, was it God the whole time? Or now just God's just like, I gave him a chance. I knew he wasn't going to respond, but I gave him the chance. Is that what's going on? I'll leave that for you guys to meditate on. But I prefer the latter, that God was actually giving him chances to repent. It just seems more in line with his character. But at some point, like, to do this job, he hardened Pharaoh's heart. So.
Now let me ask you a question. So we've all seen this term Goshen pop up a lot, where the Lord protected a lot of the plagues from going.
Yeah.
Was that where all the Jewish people lived, or?
Yeah. So back in the beginning, with Joseph, the land of Goshen was given to the Hebrews, and so they're dwelling in the land of Goshen. And so yeah, the Goshen principle is like God is separating the hardship. He's putting it on the enemies, but not on his people. And that, that can't apply to every situation, of course, but that's where that Goshen principle comes from. Yep. So that's where the Hebrews are dwelling. But the land of Goshen isn't experiencing these things, but the Egyptian land is. So thank you for bringing that up. Plague of boils, we hit that one. And then the plague of hail. At this point, things change. Yahweh raises the intensity level. I'm not going to read these verses for time's sake, but he basically says in this chapter, just before he sends the hail, when Pharaoh didn't respond to the flies, Pharaoh was like, fine, you guys can go. But when the flies were gone, God hardened his heart. And then God was like, I have not even stretched out my hand against you yet. If I sent my plagues, you would all be wiped out. And now I'm banding it up. And that's when we get the plague of the hail and the fire raining down. And the warning went out. Everybody needs to get in shelter, because if you don't listen to my word and protect yourself, this hail is going to kill everybody and all the livestock that's left out. And some didn't listen. And these were massive hailstones, such that the Egyptians had never seen before. That's how bad it was. So things are getting pretty bad. And you got fire, which is just probably lightning falling from heaven. Chapter 10. The hailstones, they made a pretty good impact on Pharaoh. He's willing to let some of the men leave, but not the rest. He says, all right, fine, your men can leave, y'all can go sacrifice. That's kind of what Moses had been asking. Like, let's just let us go out and just sacrifice to our Lord, to our God. And finally, Pharaoh says, you can do it, just let your men leave, but I'm keeping the rest of you here. And Moses is like, that's not okay. Then he sends the plague of the locusts. I won't read that section, but it's so bad that, like, this is another one of those that it's like they had never seen this kind of locust. Have any of you ever seen, like, on YouTube? They've been happening recently, though I think it's actually pretty common. A locust plague or storm, whatever they're called, like in Egypt or something. Yeah, it's gnarly. Like, it's like thick as fog. Just everywhere is locusts. So imagine one that's as bad as you've ever seen in your entire life, and all of your grandparents. Nobody has seen a locust plague like this. I mean, they just eat everything. They eat, like, all the leaves. Everything is wiped out. And I'm sure they're probably biting and stuff at some point too. But in the houses, in your bed, just everywhere. That's what they're dealing with. Now, we have to understand the agricultural impact that is being put on this nation. Like, they're getting decimated. This is not just like inconvenience. I mean, this is massive, what's happening. The next plague is the plague of darkness. What's interesting is it says it's a darkness that may be felt. What do you guys think that means? A darkness that may be felt.
And it gives you the heebie-jeebies.
Yeah, I was saying, it's a good way to put it. What is that? What could that mean?
I mean, sometimes have you ever been in like a dark room where like your mind starts to play tricks on you because it's so dark and your mind kind of, you almost like kind of see things or like you get really nervous, you get like anxiety.
Yeah.
Like a spiritual darkness or something.
I wonder if it's even that too. I was wondering that too. If it's like, just like that heaviness, like something is about this.
Yeah, heavy presence.
Yeah.
You hear him running, but you can't see him.
Yeah, we can't even see him.
I know the sound of his toes.
Yeah. But again, it's not happening in Goshen, just in the land of Egypt. And again, Pharaoh says, Pharaoh relents. But again, God hardens his heart. And he tells Moses, Pharaoh actually says to Moses, don't ever come back here again. If you see my face again, you're going to die. Pharaoh he's PO'd at this point. Pardon my French. So it's just like...
That's a little off the rails, Cam. You need to calm down.
Yeah, we'll need to bleep that out in the video. We'll have to-
Good to leave that. But before Moses leaves, he explains to Pharaoh one last thing. There's going to be one more plague. And he explains to him what it is. The firstborn of all the families, from Pharaoh down to the lowest servant girl, down to the animals, the livestock, the firstborn of the entire nation is going to be killed. I was reading through this earlier, and I actually got a little emotional just how heavy this was. A cry will go up from Egypt like there's never been before, type stuff. It's heavy. But he says that to Pharaoh, and then he went out from Pharaoh in hot anger, the chapter says. And that was the last time that he saw Pharaoh, and one of them didn't die. That's later on. But questions or comments on chapter 11 is really short. It's just basically explaining. But any questions on chapter 10?
I bet John the Baptist would have been happy to have been there for that locust season. Brings money, infinite locusts.
Endless buffet.
Hey,
man.
Do you think Egyptian waters have like a fair
Yeah, it actually says through it, the servants of Pharaoh came up and said, basically, you're crazy, you need to let these people go. We should probably let them leave. And sometimes he would listen, and then his heart would grow hardened again. So there's a lot going on. But one last plague, the final plague will result in the deliverance of Israel. Now what's interesting is, you guys remember, we didn't cover it, but from your reading, or from the movie, no, we did read it, sorry, that Pharaoh was killing the male children that were coming out. So he was killing them, but now the image shifts where God is taking the firstborn. And so we have this switch. As hard as it is, we have to wrestle with this. But after this plague, the Israelites, God instructs them in chapter 11 that you are to ask your neighbor, the Egyptians, to send you out with all of their gold and silver. So when we leave, just go ask your neighbors, give me all your stuff. And they will plunder the nation and be set up for their future as a nation. This, we could say it later, but I'll say it now just for time reason. The next chapter, it says that in this way Israel plundered the nation of Egypt. But think back with me for a second. We could just be like, oh, okay, they took the gold, whatever. Where did all that wealth in Egypt come from? How did Egypt get its wealth?
They got it on the backs of the Israelites.
Okay, they did, but even before that, definitely that, but even before that, where did all that wealth come from? You just said it. Joseph. What happened? All of the land around Egypt had to come and sell themselves and all their stuff to buy food to survive a plague, and it made Egypt the richest nation in the world. And God set all that up. Like, I'm going to send Joseph, he's going to save the world and make Egypt a super rich nation. And what happens here? After this plague, God's just like, now I'm taking all of that money and I'm giving it to my people so that they can go out and start this thing. I mean, like, that's incredible what's happening. God is setting this thing up well. But, yeah. So, anyway, the last chapter, or last two chapters, 12 and 13, let's just kind of run through these. Each of the families of Israel, let me back up. So we get to what's called the Passover. But basically, you guys know the story, right? That to survive this plague that's about to come, Israel is actually to put the blood of a lamb over the doorpost and the inlets, or whatever, what's the word? Anyway, the other places, kind of the doorposts of their houses. So the blood is covered. But this is called the Passover. But what happens is a very significant festival is instituted through this moment. It's called the Passover Festival, and then the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Have you guys heard of those before? The Passover? Yeah, so this is a feast that Israel picked up, and they continued throughout the rest of their generations, up into the present. I've hosted a few Passovers, and maybe when COVID clears up, we could maybe do that again. I'd love for us to do a Passover Seder. It's such a great experience. Lots of food, so it's fun. But it's a Passover. But what the family is to do is they are to get a spotless lamb, a male lamb that's spotless, and they're to kill it, roast it whole, and eat the whole thing. And if there's anything left over, you have to burn it. And then you take the blood, and you're supposed to put this over the doorpost. They don't do the blood over the doorpost now. But you're supposed to put the blood over the doorpost, right? And everybody in the house is passed over. It's passed over. When the death angel comes, it's going to kill the firstborn. Now, question for you guys. What is this Passover and the lamb and the blood over the doorpost? What is that all a picture of?
Since he is the lamb, he died, his blood lets us all get passed over.
Yeah. Sunday school truths, but really powerful things here. These are where these things are coming out of. That the Passover lamb, the blood of the lamb, because of that blood, they're being passed over, and they're not receiving the judgment. So that's really great. But they had a posture that they were supposed to eat this in. You guys know, with their staff in their hand, their shoes on. And why do they need to have that? Why do they need to eat this lamb with their staff in their hand and their shoes on?
They had to be ready to go.
They had to be ready to go. Yeah, they didn't even have time for their bread to leaven. And so another feast comes up. The two feasts that are around the Passover season is the Passover Seder and then the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And these are two feasts that happen that commemorates that. But the plague happens, and I won't go into some of the details of that. If you guys, I really encourage you to just kind of read through chapter 12 again and look at the kind of the feast itself and the way that the Lord instructed them to carry it out. But one last thing is this feast talked about in the New Testament, the Passover? All right, tell us about it. Where did it pop up? Do you guys remember?
Right before the crucifixion.
Correct. You guys heard of the Last Supper? Jesus, he does the bread and wine. They're celebrating the Passover Seder. They're having a festival. And Jesus says, I have really wanted to enjoy this feast with you guys before I die, before I leave. And they have a Passover festival with the lamb and everything that goes along with it. And Jesus gets to one of the spots during the Passover, and he says, this part of this meal, this feast, this represents me. This is my blood. And it represents the new covenant. And so Jesus puts himself into the symbolic parts of this meal, he puts himself into it. He says, this is me. Every time you do this meal from now on, you remember me while you're doing it. And, we just take bread and wine to kind of in place of it. But it's like when you're having a Passover, remember me in the middle of it. So, all right, we're going to keep going. Let me just finish this last chapter and we'll cut out. We know what happened. The plague came. Exodus 12, 30 through 31. Pharaoh arose in the night, he and all his servants, and all the Egyptians, and there was a great cry in Egypt. For there was no home. Imagine that. There was no home where there was not someone dead. Then he called for Moses and Aaron at night and said, rise up, get out from among my people, both you and the sons of Israel, and go worship the Lord as you have said. And Israel leaves. They take all of the stuff from their neighbors. They plunder the nation, and they leave. And they leave so quickly that their bread doesn't even have time to leaven. And so they have a feast with unleavened bread out in the wilderness. And then chapter 13 picks up. Just a couple quick things here, and we'll be done. Exodus 13, 1 through 2. Then the Lord said to Moses, saying, this is after they're leaving, he says to Moses, sanctify or set apart to me every firstborn, the first offspring of every womb among the sons of Israel, both man and beast, it belongs to me. So kind of make some connections here with me. God passes over the firstborn of Israel in the land of Egypt. But now he's saying, I spared the firstborn, and so now the firstborn belongs to me. Every firstborn male, or no, just every first, I guess it would probably be male, but every firstborn is to be consecrated or set apart unto me, whether it's a firstborn of the families, or a firstborn of the flock, or a donkey. These things are to be consecrated now, the firstborn to the Lord. Imagine an entire nation, throughout all of their history, that the firstborn is consecrated and brought before the Lord. Jesus was. I just think that's so cool. But speaking of the Passover festival, this is significant. Moses instructed them to tell their sons and their children that the reason for the Passover is this. You shall tell your sons on that day when you're holding that festival, it is because of what the Lord did for me when I came out of Egypt. So every time that they gather to have this festival, it is supposed to remind them of what God did for them. And so that's the significance of keeping that Passover every year. And then the Israelites went out, being led by Yahweh, but not towards the land of the Philistines, but towards the wilderness and towards the Sea of Reeds, with the Red Sea. It's the Sea of Reeds is what it should be. And notice this last verse. The Lord was going before them in a pillar of cloud by day to lead them on the way, and in a pillar of fire by night to give them light, that they might travel by day and by night. He did not take away the pillar of cloud by day, nor the pillar of fire by night from before the people. And we'll pick that up again next week going forward. But this is that great deliverance that God did for his people. And then he's with them going out. And I encourage you to use your imagination and just like picture that whole thing. Like, what would that be like to be a part of something like that? So, I'm done. Any comments or questions that you guys had that we didn't get to cover from the whole section?
What exactly is leavening?
Leaven? So it would be like a substance that you would put into bread, like yeast, and it would actually cause it to rise in the fluffiness of bread. So there's probably some bakers in here that can answer this better than I can. But it's like a rising agent.
Yeah, I've made bread before, and it doesn't take that long for bread to rise. So for them to have made the bread and not even have time for it to rise, it's like...
Well, so they probably didn't like add the yeast to their bread. I think somebody help me out, we add the rising agents to our bread now. There's I think just like yeast in the air. And so if you just set the bread out, it'll rise on its own. But if you added in, it like rises really quick. Is that right?
Something like that,
Something
yeah.
like that, yeah. So that's why it happened. So it would take them a little bit longer. But yeast, it symbolized like a mixing, and it was like adding something in that isn't originally there. And so part of the feast of unleavened bread is they're supposed to like get rid of all the yeast in their home and not have yeast for 7 days and stuff. So try doing that one when you're around that time.